Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Jon Myer podcast. Today's topic, FinOps-as-a-Service, optimizing MSP profitability. Now, before we get to that topic, how about we give our guests a chance to introduce themselves?
How's it going? My name is Steve Castano. I'm one of the co-founders of Better Than Services. We're a professional services company in the Amazon Partner Network. Been doing it for a few years now, and happy to be here.
Hey, John. Thanks for having us on. Steve Robinson, CEO of Hyperglance. Hyperglance is a cloud management platform that is focused in observability and management across cost, security, and compliance. We like to say we're the FinOps tool for cloud architects.
Okay, FinOps-as-a-Service. FAS. I think that's a new term, right? Has it been coined yet?
It is now.
All right, sweet. So we got it here on the recording. Steve, talk to me about FinOps-as-a-Service. What is that?
So it's basic managed services, right? And it can be one-time services as well. So when we think about all the things that a finance organization, but not just finance, right? It's also the technical side of the house in terms of what they have to consider around their cloud architecture and how that is driving consumption and how that is driving spend over time. And when we think about that, companies are in different spots in their journey, right? There's infancy. They're just kind of finding the door of inventorying what they have in their cloud estate. There's maybe an adapted model from a current finance asset tracking system or whatnot, and they're looking at how do we evolve that into our cloud. And then there's advanced, they're well on their way down the FinOps road, and they're very mature in terms of their systems, their processes, and their collaboration points across the technical side of the house and the finance side of the house in terms of how they're driving those services. Now, that all being said, a lot of companies like to consume that as a service, right? So MSPs have a fantastic opportunity here with the right model, the right partnerships, and the right tooling and platforms to take this out as a packaged service, a managed service out to their customer base.
Well, Steve from BST, and I want to kind of differentiate. We have Steve and Steve, and I don't. Steve 1 and 2. No, So, Steve, let's talk about FinOps. Why has it been in so much of an increased demand in utilizing FinOps and the culture for companies?
I think the biggest reason that I see with a lot of our customers is one of the biggest value adds to cloud is the ability to turn things on, create things immediately. You don't have to spend 4 days ordering hardware, racking and cabling. You need it, you turn it on immediately. It's almost like the adult version of a little kid not cleaning their room. You turn it on when you need something, you build a proof of concept, you test something, very frequently things get left behind. You spend a lot of time thinking about the hardware you were going to buy when you know that hardware has to last you 3 or 4 years. But in the cloud, there's a huge tendency in customers to immediately over-provision, and then they do their cost optimization later. And in the tech world, anything you're going to do later simply doesn't happen. And then you start to hit that taxi meter billing. People can't understand why their bills are that high, why their projections for the year are getting blown away 5-6 months into it. So FinOps as a service gives them a really easy way to implement a platform, look at what they're doing, find those anomalies, look at the capacities and trends, and build things the right size and keep their costs down from the beginning. And customers end up saving a significant amount of money that way.
Steve, talking about FinOps, and now you're mentioning FinOps as a service. We're trying to implement FinOps. How does it enhance MSPs as a service? What is the value there?
So just yesterday, I was at the public sector luncheon, and there was a slide they threw up among many that stated for every $1 of Amazon consumption, you can pull through $6.40 of managed services, or broadly services, right? So let's just start, right there. The question is, how do you do that profitably, right? How do you do that profitably? So you have to think about, first of all, where in the journey of cloud that you want to insert yourself, right? If again, that's the starting point. If customers are just beginning their journey, right, that is something that you can tag on as a managed service as they go out, because typically companies, enterprises growing 20% in the cloud once they make that first step year on year. So that's a step that you can take. The second piece is where they're already in the cloud, they're already consuming, and this is what Steve from BTS was referring to earlier. Now what do I do? How do I rationalize these millions, in some cases, millions of lines over time of line item detail from billing, and how do I make sense of all that in terms of an optimized cloud spend profile. And so that is an absolute perfect sweet spot of vectoring in terms of let us help you, let us guide you, let us take you through that journey, because we have experience with not just the tools and the applications that help enable that, but also what you should be looking for in terms of optimization. And as I discussed on a previous podcast with you, it's not always automate everything. That is not the jump to answer. As any architect would know, there's a lot of reasons why things are oversubscribed or over provisioned or capacity provisioned, right, at peak load or for other reasons. So what a good MSP is going to do is facilitate that bridge of conversation, again, between the technical side of the house and the finance side of the house, and really bring those two components together and embody that into managed services that's value add over time.
Steve, I was literally just talking to a gentleman before this on a podcast, and he said, and he echoed the same thing about FinOps, is that the automation is not something you should do right away. You should understand the business value, the driven on why they did those things before you go ahead and try to implement automation into it. Mm-hmm. Now, my next question is actually funny because I know you see the value of FinOps in implementing it. All right, Steve, we've talked about this, but from Steve's point of view, do you see the value of implementing it from an MSP's point of view?
Absolutely. I mean, MSPs become, your end customer's steward of your technical environment. The MSP is running it, but obviously the direct customer is paying for it. And if they're going to do a complete end-to-end job, the cost analysis needs to be there. They need to be able to project as your company's growing, get the metrics together. This is what it costs you per unit of business. So you know what things are coming. You can tell a customer when they're over provisioning, when a particular application is being a hog. Just because one piece of software might be cheaper than another doesn't mean the total cost of ownership is going to be cheaper. And when you're actually paying per unit of compute, per meg of data transferred, every bit of extra that belongs in an application ends up costing money. So for an MSP to say, hey, we might be able to do this a different way for you because the total cost of ownership is lower, you might end up using a more expensive product or having an MSP bring in a professional services team to re-architect something to lower that total cost of ownership. FinOps is the way to find those cost savings potentials. It becomes huge.
Talk to me about the partnership here, working together. How does it work? I mean, does a customer come to you, they look at what they do, oh, I want to do FinOps, and that's when you're utilizing Hyperglance. I mean, why can't I just go to Hyperglance and kind of get this done? What is the value that both of you bring together that bridges gaps?
I mean, Steve will also answer that, but I think from our side, I'd say business comes in both directions. We're directly interacting with customers that don't have a FinOps tool, and on almost every SOW we sign and almost every contract from MSPs that we see, cost optimization is a number one line item on all of them. I can spend hours a week, sifting through billing reports, trying to estimate using the AWS cost estimator, creating manual reports, or I can use a platform like Hyperglance and I can get that done near instantaneously, just integrate it to my management account and get everything I need. And then we see the business comes the other way as people are using Hyperglance and finding things that they don't understand why they're that expensive or something that's unexpected to them. They frequently turn around and engage with a professional services or MSP company to handle bringing those costs down.
Steve?
Yeah, I would just add to that, I would use the word focus, right? Our focus at Hyperglance is to develop world-class software for cloud management, broadly speaking, and more specifically around FinOps and some of the other things that we do in that domain. Whereas our partner ecosystem and BTS, they're focused in the delivery and the ongoing lifecycle management of that. When we put those two things together, right, we achieve more value to the end customer. And that's a very key component to it. I've been on both sides of that aisle, and I think trying to tackle too much of that can lead to gaps and less than optimal value that you're delivering to your end customer. So when we come together and we bridge that partnership and the synergy that we can create, I continue, and I'll give you a more specific example, right, John? So, this guy has in his head, he's got all these different problem statements or scenarios, and particularly some cases in the DoD, in Department of Defense, we won't get specific, but just I know I've been in this situation with this agency or this operating mission in the DoD where they had this problem. And I had, as the CEO of Hyperglance, I don't necessarily have that level of insight, clear, defined insight into those problem statements all the time, right? So he brings that back to me. And what we do is we incorporate that if we think that there's an alignment there into our roadmap, our product roadmap, and we build those capabilities into our product, right? So that's a very specific way in terms of we stay in our lane and we focus in our lanes, but the synergy across those lanes is where we're better together going out to the end customer. And at the end of the day, it's the end customer that benefits and derives the value from that.
Steve, how long have you been implementing or dealing with FinOps?
Honestly, FinOps platforms and other actual analytics tools, only maybe the last 2 years. Before that, it was all 100% manual. We'd go download a CUR report, pull up a CSV, start digging through things, try to get a baseline, leave things running for a while, a couple months, then cost optimize afterwards. Then we kind of discovered, I at least discovered, that FinOps was an actual thing, that there were actual tools and platforms I could use that are just so much more detailed than I could ever be. Professional services folks and MSPs, we're not forensic accountants. It's just not the skill that we have. So for us to go digging through a spreadsheet, making pivot tables, creating charts, we can read the chart, but creating that is like a labor for us. Meanwhile, by the way, we're charging customers hundreds of dollars an hour to do that. We can go use a platform like Hyperglance. That's why when we found them, we actually didn't approach Hyperglance to be a partner initially. We were aware of the platform. Someone brought it to our attention. We connected on LinkedIn, started looking at it, did a demo with Steve and his team, and looked at it and said, this is amazing. We absolutely want to use this. Can we get a demo account of our own and start doing things? Dug into the product. And one of the most incredible things about the partnership and the way it happened is, like Steve was saying, immediately in my head, I thought of the last 20 years in this business in all of the different weird use cases that I would be able to use their platform, and even a few that weren't possible in their platform yet. And the amazing thing about their team is we immediately jumped on with their product management team, with their engineers, got deeper into a demo, started making those suggestions. They showed us new things that hadn't come up yet. And now we're able to actually collaboratively use some of those use cases and experience that we have on the customer side, use their unbelievable expertise in software development, and come up with an even stronger tool to use. It's been amazing.
Were you using or doing any type of cost optimization before the FinOps terminology came around? You mentioned it, that you were digging into the cost. So cost is a benefit and it's a product of FinOps, right? So it's underneath the umbrella. It encompasses, you're not just doing optimization. How long have you been dealing with cost optimization for cloud specifically?
Literally since my first job in the cloud partner space. So probably about 5-6 years as an actual consultant working with multiple customers a year. And it still is the number one line item on SOWs that I don't think I've ever done an engagement with a customer where cost optimization was not part of what they were paying us for.
Most of the time, customers will reach out and I got to reduce my bill. I need to reduce it now. And I want to understand the approach that you take when a customer says, I need to reduce my bill. Do you come in and understand really what they're trying to achieve, or trying to understand like, okay, you have this business processes in place and here's what's happening. Your engineers are building and not understanding the cost, and finance has no clue what the cost is. They get a bill and they freak out and tell you to shut stuff down. And how are you approaching this with customers when they want to cost optimize right away? Do you pitch a FinOps thing, or do you understand and then say, hey, listen, this is probably the best methodology and culture you need to implement?
I think it starts more with a top-down analysis of what their environment does. What types of users, who's interacting with their platform, what type of data they're storing. And what we found is just over time with experience, you start to learn if you're building a data lake and you have X amount of data, what is the business value you're getting out of it? And what is it actually costing you to do it? Or if you have some sort of SaaS application, how much is it costing you per login, per user, per month? What's your per month subscription? And we look for things that just don't seem to match, someplace where it doesn't make sense. And very frequently, the first thing that we find, it's probably the most common, is non-commercial off-the-shelf products, especially software development companies that have written something back in the on-premise data center world, developers were a little more in tune with it, because when your 40 Cisco UCS Blade servers were full, you couldn't provision another environment. You were just out of stuff, and you kept it small in order to contain everything in your sandbox. When your sandbox is in the cloud and you're infinite, I found, and I don't mean to pick on developers at all, but it's created an environment where it's mass consumption. They can only grab more. So that tends to be the first things we look at is non-production environments. I found a lot of production environments have a little bit more level of maturity. We jump in and we find the development and staging environments where things are grossly over-provisioned. And then, unfortunately, before using FinOps platforms, we would have to dig into those manually and then start recommending. And that's where some of the automation stuff comes in is, are you going to turn your sandboxes off every night? Are you going to turn them off on the weekends? Are you building a giant environment that you're going to do load testing on? How often do you leave that at whatever size instances you have? Do you need it to be able to, do you need it to be able to handle 10,000 simultaneous users all the time? Or do you do a load test once a quarter and just functional testing the rest of the time? And now the thing is, with a platform like Hyperglance, we're able to go in and instantaneously graphically see, here's your hot items. Here's where most of your cost is going. And if most of your cost isn't focused at some place you're aware of already, those become the first candidates for cost optimization. People have lost money in places they didn't even know they were spending it.
I think we're all guilty as engineers that when we had a limit on our resources, right? So we're in VMware and I can spend as, oh my God, I can only get 20 on this. And I moved over to my UCS servers or my HPCs, yes. And we're like, okay, I can spin up all these. And we left them on. I don't want to restore this. I don't want to redo this. And that's our mentality when you go to cloud is like, I don't want to redo all my work, but you're not building it as per cloud and utilizing what cloud is meant to be. It's meant to be that quick deployment, utilize the scalability of things. Steve, what type of challenges have you come across when implementing FinOps for customers? And then I want to spin that to Steve from BTS on what challenges he's experienced and see the overlap on.
Yeah, so there's multiple, I call them micro use cases that span. I mean, one of them is, orphaned resources, right? And by the way, a lot of times that's with good intention, meaning they know they need to spin down the dev test or the sandbox, and they do, and they kind of spin down the VM. A lot of times they'll forget, you just orphaned an S3 attached S3 bucket, or you orphaned a network interface or whatever the surrounding architecture may be, right? So that's where automation is a good thing. That's where automation does play in terms of identifying that, alerting to that, and remediating that in some cases. The other thing that we find is just basic inventory estate understanding. Like, what do I have running? I mean, our capability is auto synced. So if you have cloud sprawl, or if you have shadow, or you have subscriptions that are being spun up that you were not aware of, there may or may not be legitimate reasons for that, but we'll capture that and we'll inventory that and we'll alert that. So it creates a kind of I don't want to say policing of the environment, but it creates a simplified audit trail of what's going on out there. And I'm surprised at how often that occurs, or maybe not surprised. I mean, it really does happen a lot. Depending upon how many workloads and they've kind of their journey, how deep they are into the cloud. The last thing that we see is this idea around optimization being left on the table. Again, I'm gonna repeat what I said yesterday and iterated a few minutes ago. Like, you don't just automate right sizing of VMs, right? There's going to be very valid architectural considerations for why they're sized the way they are, and why you have bursting, and why you have these different things. But that on the other side of the coin is, well, you could also have opportunities where you could be optimizing, right? And identifying those opportunities over time. It's not a one and done thing or a snapshot. It's a snapshot over time, multiple snapshots. You can find those heuristics of that application and find that, we are better running an RI, or right sizing is the way to do it. And it is going to save us X, and it is going to make my friends over in the finance department happy in terms of what we can extract out of our OpEx model around cloud. So, those would be the top three that I see out there that are kind of repeatable, or there's a pattern around that we pick up on.
You mentioned inventory. Are CMBDBs dead? I mean, how do you keep those dynamically up? I saw I touched it. We all remember going to manually update it because it was a static environment. We can handle that, but doesn't cloud produce a challenge? In order to properly inventory your stuff, you need to know it. In order to implement a FinOps culture, you need to know all the applications and business stuff that's happening.
Right. It's no different than anything else that's built on resources, right? You have foundational resources. You build something of value from those resources, and there's potential waste in that process, right? Build a house, there's potential waste. You build a bridge, there's a potential waste, right? And it's an over time thing. So yes, I mean, you call it CMDB. We need to understand where we sit in terms of our estate and what value we're getting out of that. And as I also said earlier, customer, always starting with customer and bridging that conversation internally between the finance side of the house and the technical side of the house with the customer as the point of reference in terms of what is the right thing to do here around experience and around performance.
Steve, what type of challenges are you seeing when trying to implement FinOps within a company?
I think one of the biggest ones is organization, getting people to understand, like we're talking about, where things are integrated, like a CMDB. That's great to have your assets, your inventory there, but the real question becomes for people, what things touch what other things? That's one of the incredible things about platforms that do that, where they'll actually give you a diagram. So let's say you do have a proof of concept, you were doing some R&D on a new feature for whatever your application is, and you built a development environment. In a large organization, you'll probably have a systems administration or engineering team provisioning your compute resources, but might have a totally separate team handling network deployments of load balancers, separate team handling database deployments of RDS or some other elastic cache. And frequently what happens is, let's say in a great world, your proof of concept was fantastic, it's great, it's greenlit, it's going to move on to the next phase. The application team says, good, we're done, provision a staging environment for this. But nobody remembered that it actually depended on these 3 or 4 other resources. So they remembered to shut down their EC2 instances, but nobody went and killed the $20,000 a month multi-AZ RDS database deployment. But when somebody looks at the diagram, and it's a perfect thing to include in a more mature change control process, time to decommission an environment, part of that analysis of the change control process is, what is the impact? What resources does this touch? Can I delete another resource? Can I lessen the size? Can I shrink a certain resource? Are there S3 buckets left behind? One of the most frequent things I see, which is dead simple, backups and snapshots. You delete the resource, but you just kept 6 months worth of backups. Do you need to archive 1 or 2 of those? If it's on the diagram and you see it, if it turns out it's costing you a couple $1,000s a month, somebody somewhere with a calculator is going to look at it and ask why that's there. Without a mature reporting tool, nobody even looks. That's one of the biggest challenges.
Wouldn't it be nice if you deleted that instance, that it told you all the associated stuff you did with that instance, be able to clean up that instance properly? I'm thinking that's something that's, needed, right? I mean, Steve, wouldn't it be nice to visually see this?
It would be, and we like to provide that for our customers. Absolutely.
I hope you got that I was leading.
I saw what you were laying down. I picked it right up. It was, that is part of, again, leveraging, thoughtfully leveraging the idea of automation around this stuff, right? You don't want to have to go out and look at those relationships, command line interface or, kind of thought around that. No, it should just be automated. It should just be easy. It should just be present in terms of seeing that, alerting on it, and remediating and fixing it, right? There's always going to be a certain level of human error, even with this AI wave that we're all going to be going through, and we're very early in that, right? There's still an element of human error that can happen. So identifying that and making it simple to fix is the thought, is the idea.
Steve, you were talking about the architectural diagrams, and I always go back to it takes time to do these. Most of the time, it's manual. Somebody's in there drawing them, and a change makes. I got to go do that. There are some automation tools out there. How are you overcoming any of these challenges that you talked about?
I think a lot of it starts with some of the tools that exist on cloud service provider platforms like AWS. One of the most underutilized things that I see that actually Hyperglance is able to leverage very, very well. Tagging. When you're creating a platform, you're actually putting out your application server, your database, your network load balancer. Add some sort of unique tag to it, a name for that project, a billing code, because the platform most platforms will be able to figure out if you have a network link between two things. But understanding, why does this link exist? What is the URL publicly available that this particular resource supports? If you tag things properly, especially if you're an infrastructure as code shop, you can build all those tags right into the infrastructure as code, into your Terraform or OpenTofu before you deploy it. And then when you connect a FinOps platform like Hyperglance to it, it will read and document all of those tags. So you can click on one tag and see everything that it touches, even though there might be two things that maybe aren't logically connected via a network connection. You can still see that this resource impacts this other resource, and it takes one extra line of Terraform code. That's it.
I have been talking about tagging probably for 10 years now. I swear, every time you talk cost optimization, where's your tags? Every time you deploy the CloudFormation template, where's your tags? Terraform, wherever, where's your tags? And everybody's like, tags, whatever. Listen, there is a discussion, though, about tagging an account because it's all related to one customer. Why tag? Well, without proper tagging for an EC2 instance or EBS, you can't do DLM, data lifecycle management. Plain and simple, you can't back them up. You can't manage them. Hyperglance can't visually map like you see them. But now how do you associate it with that business? Like, how do you resolve even tagging? I mean, Steve, I'm sure this has been a conversation. It seems weird that we're still talking about something so simple as tagging to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will take this from our customer segmentation approach, right? So when you look at sets of customers, Hyperglance is really a horizontal application. It crosses and spans commercial verticals and DoD and federal and broadly public sector, right? But when we look at breaking that down into use cases, there's the subsegment of customers that are ISVs, those that are MSP or MSP partners, and then and enterprise and government, right? That ISV slice, right, specifically, when they have one-to-many, multi-tenancy, multiple customers, being able to enable them, empower them to institute tagging. So there's two tiers of tagging in Hyperglance. There's the native tagging from the hyperscaler themselves that we pull into the views and the visualizations. And then there's the Hyperglance tag that you can also leverage in your zero-code querying and updating. So we have capabilities like fuzzy matching. So if the tag is ABCDE and somebody does ABCFG, right, we can find that and we can fix it, automate it in a matter of seconds, right? So the value add here is the ability to, again, empower the technical user to go out and maintain those tags properly in a more automated or even semi-automated way that brings better quality and fidelity to the tagging, which then drives the business value in terms of the financial views and the different pivots you can put into that, right? Working with BTS is clearly an example of where they see the use cases and we enable those use cases on the platform.
And tagging ultimately enhances the reporting capability, which with accurate reports, and we've talked about this, trusting the data, that the valid and everything's valid. Steve, implementing FinOps as a service, right? We know it's profitable because, or else we wouldn't be here talking about it. But how do you implement it with profitability in mind?
I think a lot of it comes down to the same thing you look at in an MSP model, is do more with less. When you're able to do cost optimization with 2 full-time employees, but touch 20 customers versus like the way we did it before FinOps tools existed, when you had to do it manually, I'd have to take 1 or 2 fairly senior level engineers and put them per project to go dig up those reports. So in the professional services and MSP world, time is money. If I can touch 20 customers with 2 full-time employees, it's 10 times more profitable than if I have to put 2 on every customer. The other major thing that you get is you're able to have that collective intelligence across customers. So one of the major benefits to working with an MSP or a professional services provider is, for all intents and purposes, you know what you know about your environment. but you don't know if per 1 gig of data in my database, am I paying more or less than other customers? One of the major value adds to working with someone who touches tens, hundreds of environments is we can look at it and say, hey, you see the report coming out of Hyperglance. That is what this costs you. It's fully accurate, but also it's too high. This is not on par with other people in a similar industry. That becomes a giant value add. And when you have identical reports from multiple customers because you have a primary tool, all the data starts to make sense. It's almost impossible. If I have 2 different sets of engineers doing cost optimization on 2 different customers, but very similar landscapes, it's still very hard to compare those reports together because they were created totally independently. And no matter how much we create a template, human beings have that tendency to customize, and this is a special case. When you're working with a legitimate platform that is consistent, you get the same report across all of your environments. I shouldn't say the same report, the same format. It's obviously specific to your environment, but it all looks the same. You can correlate things between environments. That gets pretty powerful for customers.
When you're implementing FinOps as a service for a customer, imagine I'm the customer and I know that I want to do cost optimization, and you say, no, John, we need to talk first, right? We sit down, we have the conversation, and you say, listen, we need to implement what's called a FinOps culture into your environment. And here's how we should do it. Are you an extension of the culture? You're implementing the culture, doing the cost optimization, all of the above?
I think we're kind of the proof of concept for that organization. A lot of people don't jump on it. They don't necessarily believe that it's necessary. But then when we do the first exercise and we're able to show them, hey, here is how much money you can actually save if you do this. Now you can do it manually and you can pay your own employees to do this constantly, or you can pay for a FinOps-as-a-Service platform and do this consistently. And here's how it pays for itself. We just showed you, we saved you X% this month. You can save that much money for every month. And things like anomaly detection. If you drift from what your baseline should be, it now gets discovered instantaneously. You don't have to wait till 2-3 months later when you start to look at the bills and go, why did our bill jump 3 months ago? And we don't know why. You find out very quickly. And the cost savings there is huge. You don't waste 3 months worth of money.
Well, let's talk about the anomaly detection. You notice an anomaly. What does that look like from the customer standpoint? Because obviously you're not building the applications. There's a business team that's building them and they're making changes. Now it's a constant cultural communication between their team and your team on the changes being made and understanding the anomalies that are taking place or the drifts. Like, how is the communication? Are you like tied directly into them so that they can say, we're doing this offload, we have the network map to it, here's all the things, and you've done your due diligence? Are you continuously looking at improvements that they can make with AWS services and enhancements? Hey, listen, we should change your architecture to here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest things is we do it first. When you're building a new environment, you can't detect an anomaly, there's no baseline. But if we help you build your environment properly the first time, and it's actually running and it's decently cost optimized when you initially deploy it, now anomalies are actually meaningful. You can actually see when maintenance is occurring, when you see costs oddly change over a couple of days. That was in fact one of the first use cases we talked to Hyperglance about when we saw what anomaly detection looked like. The first thing I thought was, okay, in a large environment, if the finance folks are looking at the FinOps reports and have no idea what the technical team is doing, what happens when somebody goes and engages a professional services team? We come in and we're doing a cutover over a weekend and we're doubling and tripling services for a few days. Eventually, the signal gets lost in the noise. Every anomaly gets waved away by, oh, we were doing maintenance. Oh, this is a new project. So one of the suggestions we made was have a maintenance window. Have something in there where you can say, hey, this is going to drift a little extra for the following 5 days. Don't let me know. That way, when something comes up, you know it's legitimately an anomaly. And one of the things we see is if we do that first deployment with folks, they then immediately start paying attention and they want to see, why are our costs growing but our customer base isn't? Why are we paying more per month but our application isn't doing anything more? Some of the most interesting things we found is sometimes the professional services cost optimization can't catch the things that the FinOps platform does. For instance, if your software developers just went ballistic and for whatever reason upgraded some module in Java, and all of a sudden your middleware is taking twice as much memory as it used to serve the exact same number of customers, to us on the professional services side, we know that's the right size because we know if we reduce that instance, your application crashes. So this is the minimum size we need. It's not until someone in the finance department says, hey, I don't get it. Our costs went up 30% over the last quarter, but we only grew as a company 5%. What's happening? Developers did something strange. Maybe you reached kind of the maximum critical mass on a database deployment, and now things are becoming less efficient. So through having FinOps in consistently and finding those anomalies, you can find where your technical process is failing as well, just by quote unquote following the money.
Talk to me about the success of working with a company like Hyperglance.
I mean, for us, it instantaneously provides an additional level of value for our customers. With MSPs and professional services, one of the most popular questions is, what next? How do we do this on our own? We can go in and do cost optimization all day, and I'm happy to do it. It's highly profitable for us. But nobody wants to pay us to do that in every environment every month. They get to stay more proactive, and when we introduce them to the tool, we're able to demo it with Hyperglance, show them why we choose to use it. And our whole goal in managed services and professional services is make the customer as self-sustaining as possible. And that cost optimization piece before working with a company like Hyperglance that would actually sit there with you and understand the individual use cases, include those into the product, there was a lot of folks that were left out that just didn't fit the standard model of the most common open source tools. Now it provides a value add for us to say, hey, we'd like to introduce you to our partner. Here's the internal tool that we use. By the way, you can have it on your own. So in 3 months when we're gone, you can still have this amazing value.
Okay, that's a value add right there because you're not ultimately keeping the tool for yourself. You're not locking in the customer to you. Right. You're like, here, it's used, we're gone. You don't want to sit there. You don't want to hire bodies to sit on their thing and land and expand. Steve, talk to me about the success of working with an MSP like BTS.
Yeah, so we have a saying at Hyperglance, and that is, if you go out to our LinkedIn page, our homepage, for instance, you'll see it out there, and it states insights visualized into action. The key word is insights, right? There's a lot of value in automation when it's applied appropriately. There's a lot of value in observability and just basic awareness, visualizations into your cloud, but it's the insights. That's the key value. So when Hyperglance partners with MSPs and advisors like BTS, what we're looking for is a partner that understands that the value delivered and the sustainable value delivered to the customer over time are those insights. He's named probably 5 or 6 already in this session, right? And there's a lot more he's got in his head, I know. And that's exciting. We talked about earlier how we drive that back into our roadmap if we're not doing it. If we are doing it, how can we enhance it? And so the value is that insight and making sure that we're always not only staying on top of, but staying ahead of where those new architectural considerations are coming from, where a customer-specific architectural approach is coming from. And just as basic as, hey, we had a spike in usage and it was by design, right? And understanding that and bridging, again, the finance side of the house with the technical side of the house and having open lines of communication, because at the end of the day, the intention there is to drive better value out to the end customer of our partnership. And so that's the key with partners is getting to those insights and enabling those insights of value.
You were talking about insights drive actions. Steve, 33% from the FinOps Foundation, their survey says that engineers do not perform actions, right? Based off of one, risk, SLA, and they want to do some better things. Having these actions to your customers to perform for, and we're going to say cost optimization or however you want to do it, automation and a key. how are you either A, getting them to perform the action, or are you performing the action?
It really depends on the customer for us. In the MSP world, a lot of the times that's continued action from our side, is we are operating that environment daily for people. So one of the biggest value adds an MSP will give a company is, an end user, I should say, is that it is our job to make sure things are running consistently the best that they can. Whereas on the professional services world, a large portion of what we do is training, is we're there to show you the right way to do it, to enable you to do it on your own. One of the biggest things we say, and one of the reasons I like having platforms that we use internally that customers can leverage on their own, I want the customer to do it on their own. If a customer is saving money, that gives them more capital to grow with. If they're aware of what their environment's doing and can track and manage their business, that's going to help them get bigger. And any business that's getting bigger is going to grow in their infrastructure. They're going to have re-architecture and new deployments and reasons to come back to us. It's one of the things that we like about platforms that are as all-encompassing as Hyperglance is we can leave that behind. The customer goes directly to Hyperglance, works with them, and then we know we're going to get work. We want that customer to be self-sustaining. When they find something that's costing them too much, they'll call us back. Only if they know that we successfully complete all of those actions. You have to do the full job. And one of the things that's amazing about having consistent reports is over the course of an engagement, a lot of the times we'll leave cost optimization to the end. Get it, it's just like security. Get it working first, then lock it down. Get it deployed and functional, then right size it. And the amazing part is you can go look at the last 6 weeks of an engagement and consistently see costs week over week going down. So it not only enables the customer to be self-sustaining, but it becomes our enforcement tool to say, hey, look at this, and you can visually see that we're actually doing our job. If we're doing cost optimization and you're not saving any money, then we're not doing cost optimization. So a tool like a FinOps platform helps hold us accountable. So when you get to the end of an engagement and you're running low on hours and you're like, nah, we just won't do that one. Now you're driven to do it because the customer already saw it. It's on their report and you've got to knock it out. It also, by the way, enables us to perform more individual cost optimization steps because we, as the professional services provider, save the time in discovering them. Those 2 engineers that I joke around about not being accountants, those guys can actually do technical engineering and implement the things that a FinOps platform finds rather than create pivot tables and pie charts.
Does it ever come to a point when you can't cost optimize anymore as an MSP trying to implement FinOps-as-a-Service or the culture?
I mean, rarely. There are some folks that are obviously very on top of things. And to be honest, it's very, very, very rare, especially if someone is reaching out to some form of professional services provider anyway. They're usually filling a skills gap. Maybe the environment grew faster than they could hire for someone. They're shorthanded. They got in a little over their head. Anytime things like that are happening, to be honest, I'd love to understand the psychology of engineers and why it happens, but engineers tend to throw resources at things. It's the cloud version of did you reboot it is like, did you double it in size? Oh, that's not running right? Upgrade the instance. Why?
That's the old mentality because the thing about it, do you remember Windows SQL Server when you inside? All right, so you're going to get this. Always go with the biggest and best because Microsoft SQL always consumed all memory available, no matter what you gave it. And that's always the classic thing when you go to cloud, throw more at it. It will, well, how about we look at what you developed, the code, how you handled it. Let's dive a little bit deeper into it. Cost optimization, when it originally came out and really came big in the last, like, I would say 5, 6 years. And I was part of the teams, and you can do cost optimization using other tools to do it, right? And it gave you the basic. In the first month, I saved 60,000, great. Next month, I saved 20,000, great. Next month, 10,000, great. Next month, 1,000. Yeah, I don't need this tool anymore. I'm done. When in reality, the way that cloud goes is that you got to continuously monitor it. Now, you might not save the big bucks anymore, but you can still save chunks at a time or continually do it. Now you should be able to use those tools. You should be able to use tools like Hyperglance, right, for your customers in order to achieve outcomes, and ultimately they'll benefit from it. And at one point they're like, you guys are awesome. We're going to keep you on. We want to keep doing this. I want to talk about the partnership between the two of you. I mean, I can really feel that this is a collaboration. Right? There's a back and forth approach. So, Steve, what does the partnership feel like and look for you within collaboration? You already talked about it. Their customers provide you feedback, your customers, and we do enhancements for it. What else does it look like?
Just keeping their eye on where the ball, the pucks go. My son plays hockey. I'll use that metaphor, right? Where the puck's going, right? Not where it's at. And when you have every customer in every environment is unique in my experience, right? And that's because all the workloads are different. All the applications and the data that sits around that executable environment is different, right? And so you can't just cookie cutter from one customer to the next. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't common low-hanging fruit that's out there for you. Did you realize that you're snapshotting and you don't need to be? Or there's a lot of there's low-hanging fruit, but aside from that, it's more about the growth pattern of the consumption, which typically happens year on year around 20% in our experience, conservatively, and it's understanding where that architecture is going based on that workload requirements, right? And then what's the best architecture, but not just the best architecture cost optimized. It's that second half. And that second half definitely gets kind of lost in the shuffle, particularly when you refactor legacy apps. I mean, we haven't talked about that, right? How about, there's born in cloud apps, and inefficiencies and optimization opportunities reside there, but also the shifting from prem to cloud and the refactoring of legacy apps. I'd say most of the time, cost isn't necessarily factored in that per se. It's more about how do we make sure it's running and operating and not crashing on us, and that we've got the appropriate uptime and the right SLA metrics met, et cetera, and cost just kind of sits down here. Well, 6, 12, 18, 24 months down the road, wow, what just happened there? Well, you didn't build in your cost framework into your architecture. And so when you refactored that app. And so that's another area that you can look at in terms of the experience that a partner like BTS has. Although every customer environment and use case is unique, there are specific patterns of repeatability there that you can apply. Right? I don't like using best practice; it's just overused. But that's basically what it is, right? They're on the forefront of the touch point of the customer's environment, and they can look for patterns that they can apply in other client engagements. And as we already talked about, and then feed that full cycle back into our roadmap and our product and our platform to make it stronger, better over time.
Steve brought up a good point. Before I ask you what the partnership is like, a cookie cutter came to mind. Doesn't one size fit all in a FinOps approach?
I was literally laughing when he said it because I joke around and I always say that every customer feels as though they're a beautiful and unique snowflake. And yes, they are all different. Everyone has their specific use case. But when you dig into the heavy infrastructure side of things, if you have a load balancer, middleware, and a database, for all intents and purposes, we don't really have to know what your application does. It's a known architecture. If you're building a data lake and you're building something on S3, it is artifacts and object storage on S3. It costs the same. It takes the same to replicate it. It takes the same to scan it. It is the same thing. You didn't invent something new. You might be using it in a new way. That's the incredible thing about some of the cloud world, is that the services are somewhat generic and reusable. For instance, an example that comes to mind all the time that ties right back into the financial side of things is containerization. You can run ECS Fargate for a certain number of tasks very quickly and very cheaply. I think the cutover is somewhere around 24 Fargate tasks. That beyond that, it actually becomes cheaper and more performant to switch over to a full Kubernetes cluster. It doesn't matter what your Fargate tasks do. It doesn't matter what's in your containers. If you run 25 of them, it's cheaper to do it in EKS. So yes, it might be the code might be completely unique. You might have the most individual users ever. It's still a Docker container running in a Kubernetes cluster that you're paying X dollars a month to run. FinOps cuts out all of the unique snowflake nonsense and shows you this is the technology, this is what it's costing you, here's the break-even point to upgrade. And that's the incredible part about including the financial implications in your infrastructure. It's super easy to deploy everything on Lambda. I'm wearing a Lambda t-shirt. I'm a big fan. I love it. But if you're going to run 10,000 simultaneous Lambdas, it might be better for you to put your Node.js code in a larger application, run it on an EC2 instance, and run all those on 3 instances. FinOps tools find that for you.
I thought you were going to say I'm wearing a Lambda shirt. Duh. And I was waiting for that. Steve, talk to me about the collaboration and the partnership with Hyperglance.
I would honestly reiterate all of the things that Steve said. And the biggest one for us on the BTS side is the collaborative back and forth. It's amazing when you find a tool that you love, that you'd be happy to purchase and then actually recommend and hopefully sell to your customers. But no tool is perfect. We all know that. That's why they still have software developers. Everything is constantly improving. And there's tons of times where delivery teams are working with their chosen favorite tool in a particular vertical and saying, well, this is great, but I wish it also did this. Or I love doing this in this environment. I wish this tool also worked in this environment. That's what I was saying. The partnership was kind of accidental. We were just on a meeting saying, hey, we'd really love it if your tool did this. And they said, well, why don't you join one of our product development meetings and make these suggestions? We'll see what we can do. So the major value from our side to the partnership is that everything we wish the product did, we have a direct line to tell the folks that are creating it. And if it's a use case that we do see repeatedly over and over again with multiple customers, they go, well, great. We'll put something together. We'll do a demo with you. Help us figure out how that works. We'll set up some more meetings. And then this thing we wish happened shortly afterwards actually works. It's incredible.
It sounds like an awesome partnership growing. There's so much coming. I can't wait to see what's next for actually both of you. And in fact, what is next?
I mean, the next thing for us is to continue to grow our professional services partner model. That's one of the things. Was Hyperglance was our first software platform partner. And what we found is that we kind of stopped going directly after customers all the time. We found that there are a ton of partners out there that need that frontline ground knowledge. So we've switched our entire business over to building our partner network so that we have Hyperglance as a FinOps platform, but then we have other partners in other industry verticals. So when our customers come to us, we can be the trusted advisor. So the goal for BTS, really for me, for the next year, is to become that trusted advisor. So my customers know they can call me, ask me any question they've got, and I will refer them to the proper partner, set them up with demos for the platforms they need to see. And if I don't have the resources internally, refer them to another partner to handle it.
All right. This has been a great discussion, not only FinOps as a service, MSP profitability. I think it's the next and the greatest thing. We will coin the term fast, and we'll get it out there as quick as possible. Steve from BTS, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Steve from Hyperglance, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, John.
All right, everybody, this has been another awesome episode for the Jon Myer podcast. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify because we're out of here.